trade-off between savings and consumption, consumption and investment. Now we can imagine that if this is the market for loans that brings the demand to invest savings equal to the supply of income not spent and made available as savings, then we can bring this up here. And that's the amount of investment that would occur in the society, 0 to I1, which would mean by definition that this is the point on the production possibility frontier that we're at, point A, and this is the amount of consumption in society. So given the resources in society, this is the amount of the resources devoted to making our current consumption goods that we consume every day in the marketplace, and this is the proportion of resources devoted to investment, replacing machinery that wears out, and investing in new machinery to increase our productive capability in the future. Now, of course, people's preferences could change. We can imagine people wanting to consume less and save more. And again, how would this manifest itself in this diagram? Well, if people consumed less and saved more out of their income, the supply of savings would increase. It would shift to the right. And therefore, a new supply curve would be to the right of the existing one. The intersection point of the new supply curve and our demand curve would be further down here. There'd be more savings, more investment, and less consumption. And of course, we can imagine that people chose to save less and consume more. And that means the supply curve would shift to the left. It would be further here. And that meant that the new supply curve, representing less savings in the society, would intersect the demand to borrow savings for investment purposes further up along the demand curve, and resulting in less savings and less investment. So investment would be less, and consumption would be more. So those are the trade-offs that can be made in a society. The problem is that this process can be distorted, okay? This process can be distorted. And how can it be distorted? Well, how does money come into the economy? Well, let me give the example of the United States. And while the mechanism might slightly vary in terms of the technicalities, it's really the same in virtually all modern countries of the world, okay? You have a central bank. That is the monopoly, government-bestowed monopoly issuer and controller of the money supply. Now, let us suppose the central bank, the monopoly issuer and controller of the money supply, decides to increase the supply of money in society for whatever political or policy or ideological reason might be the motivation for doing so. How do they do it? Well, in most countries in the world, and I presume that there must be some equivalent mechanism here in the Bahamas, as is represented in the United States, we have a central bank called the Federal Reserve System. Now, when the Federal Reserve wants to increase the money supply, what it does, it goes into the financial market and it buys government securities or any other type of private bond or IOU that is issued by someone in the past. And they go and buy it out of someone's portfolio, which can also be a bank. And so they say, look here, why hold on to that government security, that bond that the government issued in the past to borrow money, or this private security, such as someone's mortgage that they issued in the past to borrow money to buy a house? Why wait until the mortgage comes due to get your money back? Why wait until the government security comes due, matures, to get your money back from the government? Why don't we, the central bank, give you back that sum of money right today, plus a rate of interest, an extra premium on the face value of the bond or the security that makes it worth your while to sell it out of your portfolio today and then have that money available to use for other purposes, rather than hold on to it until the mortgage is paid off or the bond or the security has reached maturity and the government issuer would then pay you your full principal back. Okay? So that's how this is done. Government securities or mortgages are pulled out of private people's or banks' portfolios and go into the central bank's portfolio. But how does the central bank pay for this? Well, they issue money. Listen, here, X number of dollars for that mortgage that you're holding in your bank portfolio. X number of dollars for this government security that you're holding in your portfolio, having lent money to the government in the past. Here's a check. This is money. Now, how does the central bank create that money? It does so out of thin air. Right? I mean, it sounds bizarre. And we can imagine, we can picture like in the old days when people used mostly this, right? Cash paper money. And you can imagine in the bottom of the central bank, someone with the printing press, right, to print these things, printing more and more and more and more. Just printing the money with a bunch of paper and ink. Well, today it's simpler. For example, in most modern banking systems, the central bank has some staff members sit at a computer screen. And the instruction is said, create $2 billion. You just punch his numbers in onto the account on the computer screen. And there's $2 billion more. You don't even do the printing. Because it's all ledger book, credit card, and check money. But they just create that money out of thin air. Now, again, in most countries that have central banks, the central bank will often buy these mortgages or government securities out of the investment portfolios of financial institutions, banks. So now the banks, having sold those things out of their investment portfolio to the central bank, find themselves with a large amount of extra money to lend. So how do you attract people to borrow? Well, you lower the rate of interest, because now there has been an increase in the supply of money in the banks for lending purposes, right? S1, S2. But this isn't representing real savings. This is just money created by the central bank. Nobody's changed, well, I'm going to consume less, I'll put more money aside for my retirement, for my kids' education, for that, special vacation I've always wanted to go on. No, this is just money created out of thin air. So we can imagine that people's willingness to save hasn't changed. It's still the black supply curve on the diagram, as opposed to the red one, representing that plus the amount of money that the central bank has created and put into the banking system. Well, now the banks finding themselves with more money want to expand their lending, but can only do so by offering at a lower rate of interest. Hey, we have more money to lend. Come and borrow. We'll now lend you a loan for whatever investment purposes for less, a lower rate of interest. Instead of 5%, 4.5%. Instead of 4.5%, 3%, and so on. Now, two things now happen. Yes, the banks have extra money created by the central bank to extend loans with. And that decrease in consumption to be able to shift resources, right? The limited amount of resources in society to do more long-term investment activity instead. The problem is, people haven't changed their savings preferences. Indeed, now at the lower rate of interest, income earners may find it attractive to save less than they did before. Right? When the interest rate is 5%, you make your choice. Well, it's worth putting aside maybe 5% of my income, 10% of my income to earn the interest income. So I accumulate the interest over time. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I have my saved money plus all the interest income. But when the interest rate is pushed down in this way, consumers might, well, now the market rate, instead of being 5%, just to use that as an example, is now only 3% or 2%. Well, it's not, what's it worth to forego consumption in the present to earn in the future when now it's only 2% interest? That's not much more than the money I'm setting aside, the principal. Why should I put it aside? Or at least not as much. So in fact, the lower rate of interest induces people to spend less, save less, and consume more. Because if you're not saving, you're obviously spending. 3. Now, for people to increase their consumption, it would be necessary, to this point, C2. It would be necessary to decrease investment to I3 to be able to be at point C. And that's the tension that occurs in a business cycle. Everything seems initially to be booming. There's investment spending,